biohacking, performance, mastery, mindset, holistic health. This is a show about getting better every single day. I'm on a mission, guys, to help over 1 million people get healthy and lose weight. Why? Because when you lose weight and get healthy, you have higher self-esteem. You have more self-confidence. And that person goes out and crushes their goal and starts living the highest version of themselves, and then they have way more impact on the world. All right, let's go, guys. I am super excited for today's guest. I got Cyrus Khambatta. He's a PhD, and Robby Barbaro, who has multiple PhDs. And they're the co-authors of the New York Times bestselling book, Mastering Diabetes. They have a Mastering Diabetes coaching program. They've helped thousands and thousands of people get to the root cause of insulin resistance and diabetes and all forms, type 1, type 1.5, and type 2. Super excited to bring these guys on the show. Cyrus Khambatta and Robby Barbaro, welcome to the show, brothers.
What's up, Joel? It's so good to be here with you, man. Thanks for having us here.
Your intro is fantastic. I'm so stoked right now. I do have to provide one quick correction. I do not have multiple PhDs. Oh. I have an MPH. Okay. Cyrus does have a PhD.
I see. I already blew this. I already messed up on the podcast. That's how we do it sometimes. I try reading these bios, and I was blown away by your guys' background. And here's the thing that I'm excited about too is that, you guys even allude to this, is that, hey, you're not traditional doctors, right? But yet you're helping more than the Western doctor can in type 1 and all forms of diabetes. So I'm super excited to have you guys on the show. And, one of the things I like to just start off with in the show too is like, was there a day that, this is different. I got 2 guys on the show, but 2 guests, but was there a day that you realized like, yeah, what I'm doing right now, I don't want to do that. I want to help people master diabetes.
Was there one day that I don't think I've ever been asked that question before?
Was there a day that you just realized, like, I'm going to do something completely different? And you guys have great backgrounds because you both suffer from type 1 diabetes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a great question. I've, again, also never been asked that question. And
you haven't been on the right podcast. That's why.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, I have to say, I feel, in thinking about my answer, I feel very blessed in that, my professional career has always been in alignment with this same mission here to help people really learn how to make lifestyle change. And that's quite a blessing for me.
Yeah. Love that.
Okay. I'm gonna take you back in time. When I graduated from UC Berkeley in 2012 with a PhD, at the time of graduation, there's basically 2 paths that you can go down. You can either become a professor or you can go into biotech / the pharmaceutical world. That's pretty much the 2 choices that you're presented with. And so people kept on asking me, they're like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'll figure it out at some point. And then graduation came and I was like, I don't have an answer for this. So it turns out that the professor that I was working for at that time was basically like, hey, why don't you come work for my biopharmaceutical company? And, you can be here for 2 years and, we'll do some fun stuff. So I was like, cool, sweet. Thanks. I'll take it. So I went and I worked for him, and he's a great guy. I love the guy. And he means very well. But the work that I was actually doing was driving me nuts. It was just so boring because it was I was sitting on Excel all day long, trying to tweak these spreadsheets, and I was performing these experiments, and the experiments literally weren't going to have an impact on humanity in any way, shape, or form. So we were running this thing called a mass spec, which is this very expensive piece of equipment that costs usually somewhere on the order of $1 to $2 million. And it takes an entire team of people to be able to run it and analyze it and get it to perform these very complex biological experiments properly. And so the mass spec had to be running 24 hours a day. And so what that means is that we had to take shifts, and literally I would leave the office at 4:00 PM. And then I was on shift from 7:00 PM to midnight that night from my house, sitting there tweaking the mass spec and making sure that, it was operating properly. So I'm sitting there one day and I'm pretending to do work. And I look over at my not then wife, my girlfriend. And I was like, I swear to God, if I look at one more of these samples, I'm going to shoot someone. And she looks at me, she goes, why don't you quit your fucking job and be done with it and do what you actually like? And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I need to do. So I credit her for actually pushing me to be stop your complaining and just be done with this so that you can actually move on with your life.
I love that. That is phenomenal. And thank God you did, because you guys wouldn't be here today doing what you're doing, really living the highest version of yourselves, living your purpose and changing people's lives. So that is amazing.
Totally.
Okay. I want to dive into this book. I got a chance to get it a little bit before everybody, and I got to go through it, but I'm going to definitely get the hardback or the paperback, because I like to just go through and underline a lot of stuff. One of the things that struck me was you said insulin is not the enemy. Wait, what? I mean, all the experts that I've been listening to, for Dr. Jason Fung, several are saying, hey, insulin is the problem. Insulin is what's making you fat. Can you guys kind of talk about that?
I love talking about insulin. It's literally one of my favorite subjects. Okay. So you're right. The world of low carbohydrate dieters in particular point a finger at insulin. They say bad insulin. Insulin's bad for you. Insulin is going to make you fat. Insulin's going to make you more diabetic. Insulin is the thing that's responsible for increasing risk for many chronic diseases, including high blood glucose turning into diabetes, including heart disease, and including cancer. Okay. So when I was going through my PhD, I was kind of learning a lot about insulin biochemistry and blood glucose management. And I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, is insulin good or is insulin bad? Like, what is the answer, right? And as I was like doing experiment after experiment after experiment and reading paper after paper after paper, I was like, okay, insulin is a required hormone for life. Insulin is so important in the world of biochemistry that when you have an insulin secretion deficiency, or if you're living in an insulin deficient state, you die. Period. End of story. Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, insulin deficiency is not compatible with life. And that is true in the human world. It is true if you're a cat, if you're a dog, if you're a raccoon, if you are a cow, if you're a sheep, if you're any mammal and you don't secrete a sufficient amount of insulin, you die. Okay. It might take you 2 months. It might take you 6 months. It'll take some period of time, but you die. It's just that simple. Okay. So when I learned that, I was like, okay, cool. So insulin is not the enemy. In fact, insulin is required for life. What is the enemy? What is the problem? Why do people point a finger at it and implicate it in so many different chronic diseases?
Yeah.
And as I delved deeper and deeper, I began to realize that the reason why people point a finger at insulin is because it's not insulin that's a problem. It's excess insulin that's a problem. It's a very, very minor distinction, but it is so important to understand. Okay. So everybody has a physiological normal set point for the amount of insulin that is considered, physiologically normal to secrete in order to help control your blood glucose. Okay. That is its primary responsibility. But in addition to that, insulin is also the single most powerful anabolic hormone in your body. There is no other hormone in your body that is responsible for as much fuel storage and cellular growth as insulin. Nothing. Not testosterone, not human growth hormone, not IGF-1, nothing. Okay. Insulin is the king of all hormones when it comes to anabolic processes, AKA synthetic processes, right? So it stands to reason that if you have a biological set point for the amount of insulin that your pancreas should be secreting on a daily basis in order to regulate your blood glucose values, in order to provide an impetus for amino acids to get inside of your muscle and liver, in order for fatty acid uptake to occur, but also for DNA synthesis and RNA synthesis and protein synthesis and carbohydrate synthesis and glycogen synthesis, like literally any kind of synthetic process that you can think of, insulin has a role in it. Okay. It's that powerful. So operating at your biological set point is actually not dangerous. It's actually required because, again, there's so many metabolic processes that are requiring insulin for use in all tissues, from your brain to your liver, to your kidneys, to your heart, to your vasculature and beyond. Okay. But here's the problem. When you have developed a metabolic state in which your pancreas has to oversecrete insulin, AKA secrete excess insulin, that's where the problem starts. Okay. So excess insulin becomes very problematic because excess insulin is a signal that you are forcing your pancreas to work in overdrive and work harder than it has to in order to regulate many metabolic processes. So if your set point, let's just say, for the sake of argument, your set point is approximately 30 units per day. the equivalent of 30 units of insulin per day. But you're doing something, whatever it is in life, that forces your pancreas to have to secrete 35 units of insulin per day. That may not sound like a big difference, but 5 units on a baseline of 30 is like a 15% increase. That's a big deal, right?
Wow.
So as far as your pancreas is concerned, your pancreas is now having to perform 15% extra work. The beta cells are now working 15% harder. And as a result of that, beta cell physiology completely changes. Okay. The beta cells themselves actually become what's called hyperplastic. They get larger in size, and they get larger because the demands that are now put on them has increased. So they get larger, and as a result of getting larger, they now secrete more insulin. So the concentration of insulin has increased, and the size of the actual beta cells themselves has increased. So inside of your islet cells in your pancreas, when it's experiencing hyperplasia, which effectively is like enlarged beta cells, the beta cells basically can't maintain a high level of insulin production for a very long period of time. Okay. They can do it for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It depends from individual to individual. But if you gain weight, you will force your pancreas to have to work harder. If you eat a diet that makes you insulin resistant, AKA makes the amount of glucose that goes inside of your liver and muscle, if it lowers the amount of glucose that those two tissues can take up, then you're going to force your pancreas to work harder. If you develop an insulin resistant state, which is sort of the entire crux of our argument, that if you develop an insulin resistant state inside of your liver and muscle, then you're going to force your pancreas to work harder. And those beta cells have a finite lifespan. They're so important that you have to secrete insulin every single day of your life, period, end of story. And if you don't, and if you force your pancreas to have to work too hard and those beta cells begin to get compromised, the cellular population goes lower and lower and lower. And now before you know it, now your beta cells are only operating at 70% capacity or 60% capacity or 30% capacity. And as a result, your blood glucose begins to go up. Okay. So long story short, I'll stop talking. But the idea here is that insulin is required. Excess insulin puts an undue stress on the beta cell population that can then lead to beta cell, the population being compromised. And when the population is compromised, let me back up. When you're in a hyperinsulinemic state, AKA when you're manufacturing too much insulin, that promotes cell growth in an accelerated fashion. And when you create the signal for accelerated cell growth, guess what you develop? It's these things called tumors. Okay. So tumors begin to form due to a rapid turnover of tissues, of cells in many tissues. And so when you're creating this impetus for rapid cell growth, you increase the risk of developing tumors. And that increases your risk for many forms of cancer. When there's too much insulin in your blood, it actually negatively impacts your vasculature and increases your risk for cardiovascular event in the future. So the excess presence of insulin has cardiovascular effects. It has cancer effects. And as a result of that, you can end up compromising your beta cell population, which in the long term will end up putting you in an insulin deficient state. And that's going to take years off of your life.
Wow. Robbie, anything to add? I mean, I don't know. He nailed it, but anything you'd add?
I'm going to quiz you. Are you ready for the quiz?
Oh, go for it. Yeah. You know what I was thinking though, too, is, it's so interesting. You said, we need insulin. And I'm thinking, well, of course you guys would say that. You guys are both type 1 diabetic. And isn't that the problem? The beta cells or there's an autoimmune attacking the beta cells. And so they're not producing enough insulin. So they might say, well, of course, Cyrus, of course, Robbie. Yeah, you're going to say insulin's good because you actually need it, which is like the opposite of like the type 2 diabetics, right? They've got too much. But could you kind of talk about that and how it's maybe a little bit different than maybe a type 1 diabetic versus a type 2, and how that changes the way you look at things?
I'm going to let Cyrus take most of this from like the scientific perspective.
Yeah.
But I just want to say from what we do at Mastering Diabetes, from what we have written in the book, is we really unify all forms of diabetes to focus on one thing, which is insulin resistance.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're living with prediabetes, type 2, type 1, type 1.5, gestational diabetes, MODY, or any other type. You still have to put an emphasis on how efficiently is insulin working inside your body, whether it's exogenous or endogenous insulin. So that's really something we do here. But I'll let Cyrus explain like why it's kind of foundationally the same thing. Like even the type 2s, even you, bro.
Yes.
You need insulin as just as bad as we need insulin. So
No, I don't. I was on the keto diet for years. What are you talking about? Which we're gonna get into. We're gonna get
You
into.
still needed insulin. Trust me.
Yeah.
You still needed it.
I
Yeah.
love this too. And you know what? One of my mentors, I love this, and he said this, and maybe you'll echo the same thing. He said, listen, he said, I don't care about guys that are doing keto, they're doing carnivore. He's like, the brain needs glucose. He's like, I don't care what they say. They're gonna try to tell you that the brain runs on ketones. He's like, the brain needs glucose, whether you like it or not. It's the preferred fuel. So maybe you would even you can echo that as well. But that always sticks with me. He's like, these fads come and they go. He's like, at the end of the day, it always comes down to these principles. Never forget that. And he, you know what? Fads come and go. He's right, but nothing changes. The principles, the foundation never changes.
100%. Yeah. So there's so much confusion about whether or not your brain should run on ketone bodies or whether it should run on glucose. I mean, there's even people who are saying your brain is made of fat and cholesterol. Therefore, you should be eating a high fat and high cholesterol diet in order to feed your brain. And when I hear things like that, I'm like, you're not qualified to talk about biochemistry. Don't talk. Right. So I don't mean to be like rude here, but I think your original question was somebody's going to say, oh, well, you have type 1 diabetes. Therefore, of course, you're going to like insulin because you have to inject insulin. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I want you to realize something. So first of all, I don't like insulin. I'm not like looking forward to injecting insulin, right? There's no like emotional attachment that I have to insulin. The reason I inject insulin is because insulin is a required metabolic hormone in order to facilitate many, thousands of metabolic reactions in my body, as it is in Robby's body, as it is in your body. Okay. So I have to take insulin in order to stay alive because, again, my pancreas doesn't make it. Same thing with Robby. People who are non-diabetic, their pancreas just happens to be making insulin for them. They're just unaware of it and they can't measure it and they can't see it. Therefore, they think of it as being like a different, I don't know, it has a different relation. They have a different relationship with it, right? Yeah. But, in your particular situation, let's just say I turned you into a type 1 diabetic overnight. Right? Tomorrow morning, you wake up and all of a sudden you're now insulin dependent, right? You are going to also have to figure out how much insulin to give yourself at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, before you work out, after you work out, before you sleep, yada, yada, yada. You're going to have to figure out all that stuff, right? And it takes some time. It's not a big deal. But you are going to have to supplement with insulin because you just don't make it. And if you didn't supplement with it, then bye-bye. You're done in 3 months or 6 months and you're done, okay? So I want people to understand it's not a question of liking insulin. I'm not trying to defend insulin simply because I have to take it. I'm talking about it from, again, the biological principle of the fact that insulin is a required metabolic hormone and is the most powerful anabolic hormone that is required. And insulin insufficiency is incompatible with life, period, end of story. Okay. Yeah. So you're right in the sense that people with type 1 are insulin deficient because we have experienced an autoimmune attack. And in fact, it's an ongoing autoimmune attack of the beta cells. It's not like it just happened and then disappeared. It is happening as we speak. My immune system, Robby's immune system, is constantly monitoring the population of beta cells because it has identified some protein, some cell surface receptor as being a potential threat. And anytime the immune system detects that, it will kill it immediately and it will destroy that cell, right? So this is happening all day long, every single day. And the scientists don't know how to turn off that program yet. I'm sure
but if anybody listening to the show knows, please contact us.
Yeah, please let us know.
Beautiful.
Okay. But people with type 2 diabetes are in a slightly different situation because like we talked about earlier, when you develop insulin resistance, what you're doing is you're basically creating a metabolic traffic jam inside of your liver and inside of your muscle. And that metabolic traffic jam makes it such that the accumulation of excess fatty acids that have accumulated inside of both of those tissues actually decreases insulin signaling. So in other words, what that means is that when you're eating a high fat diet, but actually, let's go backwards. You ate a ketogenic diet. Give me a high fat meal that you would eat during your ketogenic diet.
Okay. And I would say, I'm going to give you a couple things, but I would say I probably wasn't. And when we think of pure ketogenic, we're talking like 80% fat. I never did that. Okay. But yeah. I will give you an example. I was doing a lot of like the bulletproof diet. So I would do the MCT oil with the butter and the coffee in the morning. And then I would use that as a fast to, it wasn't a legit fast, but it was, I would use that. It was a low glucose, let's say, fast. And or low insulin, I guess, response fast till like lunch. And then I would have a couple eggs and some smoked salmon for like lunch. And then maybe a salad later on in the day. And then I would end the night with some type of protein, some type of grass-fed meat, and maybe like a sweet potato, and some green veggies. That was like a very typical day.
Okay. So your lunch was basically eggs plus smoked salmon, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So eggs plus smoked salmon equals so you're getting a decent amount of fat and a decent amount of protein. I don't know the total number of grams of either one of those two, but neither one of those foods has an abundant source of carbohydrates.
Right.
Okay. So the total amount of carbohydrate that you get from that meal is probably like, I don't know, 2 grams, maybe 3 grams.
Yeah.
And if I had to estimate based off of, how much you were probably eating, what's that?
Chronometer. I know you talk about that in the app. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's just say that single meal probably contained on the order of, I don't know, maybe 30 grams of fat and maybe 40 grams of protein, something like that.
Sure. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay. So let's just say we're somewhere on that level. Okay. So the fat that you're consuming.
Don't judge me, Cyrus. Don't judge me. Okay.
I've been judging you since we started. Too late. Okay. So the fat that you're consuming is actually locked up as a triglyceride. So a triglyceride is basically 3 fatty acids that are covalently attached to a glycerol backbone. So the triglyceride, you're eating lots of them. You're eating thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of triglyceride molecules. They enter your mouth, they travel down your esophagus, they get into your stomach, they start to get unfolded, they get inside of your small intestine. In your small intestine, that's where the bulk of nutrient digestion occurs. The triglyceride is ripped apart. The glycerol is separated from the 3 fatty acids. The glycerol basically goes on to become a glucose precursor. We don't need to worry about that. But the 3 fatty acids end up getting absorbed through the walls of your small intestine. They go through your small intestine into your lymph system. From your lymph, they get dropped into your blood inside of these these chylomicron particles. So these chylomicron particles are like these little spaceships, okay? So there's trillions of them floating in your blood at any given moment in time. And their job is to circulate through your cardiovascular system and then go to your adipose tissue and your liver and your muscle and deliver fatty acids and cholesterol. That's its job. So these little spaceships are basically in circulation, and they go and they deliver fatty acids and cholesterol mainly to your adipose tissue. That's the primary target. But in addition to that, they also deliver fatty acids to your liver and to your muscle. Okay, your liver and muscle end up accumulating fatty acids from the chylomicron particles. And depending on how much fat you're consuming at any given meal and or in a chronic state, the more fat you consume, the more spillover into your muscle and liver occurs. Okay. So over the course of time, you end up storing fatty acids inside of your liver and fatty acids inside of your muscle and fatty acids inside of your adipose tissue. Your adipose tissue, believe it or not, is a very safe place to store fatty acids. That's exactly where they're supposed to go. From an enzymatic and a mechanical perspective, it is the perfect place to put. It's the Costco warehouse of fatty acids. But when it comes to your liver and muscle tissue, they are capable of storing small amounts of fatty acids, but not large amounts. So what ends up happening is that when you're eating high-fat meals, especially if they're consecutive high-fat meals, then you end up putting a decent amount of fatty acids inside of your liver and inside of your muscle, and they get locked up into triglyceride molecules once again. Mm. So this is where the problem begins, because those two tissues are designed to be able to uptake a small amount of fatty acids. But when you exceed their biological storage capacity, what then ends up happening is the cell goes into a little bit of like a self-defense mode where it's like, damn it. Like, I don't want all these things. Like, I didn't ask for them in the first place. It's beyond my physiological design. There's too much energy coming into this cell right now. How do I block more energy from coming into this cell? Okay. So the response that these tissues create is a blockage or a reduction in their ability to talk to insulin. Because again, let's go back to what we said earlier. Insulin is the primary anabolic hormone in your body, the most powerful anabolic hormone in your body, which means that it is responsible for more, number one, fuel uptake, and number two, more cell growth than any other hormone in your body. So if you want to limit fuel uptake, well then, boom, you have the answer. Just tell the insulin receptors to become less functional. Start to pull those insulin receptors in off of the cell surface, or do something from the inside that renders the insulin receptor less effective. So that's what happens. These fatty acid molecules end up going through a whole cascade of biological changes. They turn into these things called ceramides and DAGs. And then those things go and they attack the internal receptor, the internal domain of the insulin receptor, and they make the insulin receptor less effective. So what the cell is effectively doing is it's basically intentionally trying to make the insulin signaling pathway less effective. And as a result of that, the next time you go eat something that's carbohydrate rich, like a banana, an apple, right? A bowl of black beans, or maybe a bowl of quinoa, something that doesn't really contain that many grams of carbohydrate, like 15, 20, 30 grams of carbohydrate. All of a sudden, your blood glucose goes very high, within the first hour or 2 hours, right? And the reason for that is because the glucose from that carbohydrate tried to get inside of your muscle and tried to get inside of your liver, but it was blocked because insulin came and knocked on the door and goes, hey, by the way, there's some glucose in the blood. Do you want to take it up? And both your liver and muscle responded by being like, nah, sorry, we're done. I'm playing insulin resistance. I don't want to talk to you right now. Leave.
Wow.
So insulin ends up getting blocked from communicating with the liver and muscle. So insulin actually gets trapped in your blood, and the concentration of insulin goes up, making you hyperinsulinemic. Exactly what we were talking about before. Very dangerous metabolic state. Number two, glucose can't get inside of your liver and muscle because insulin couldn't do its job. So now glucose ends up accumulating inside of your blood, making you hyperglycemic. So now you are hyperinsulinemic and hyperglycemic simultaneously. And as a result of that, you now are living with classic insulin resistance. Again, in your liver, in your muscle, caused by the fatty acid metabolic traffic jam, right? That is insulin resistance in a nutshell. And that's what happens to people who develop prediabetes and then eventually type 2 diabetes, whose glucose values just kind of creep up over the course of many months to years. And in some people, it could take upwards of like 4 to 5 years for them to even demonstrate that their blood glucose is elevated. But in reality, they've been living in an insulin resistant state for many years preceding that.
Yep. So then, and this makes perfect sense. And you got some great visuals in the book, and which is helpful for me. How are people being successful on the keto diet? Do you think because that's like 80% fat, or like the majority of that, I just gave you an outline of my diet, like very low carb, but the people that are doing that, in your opinion, is it, short-term gains, you will do well, but long-term, it's not an ideal plan.
Joe, I want to comment just a few things here on this topic. So number one, we wrote about this in the book, but like we respect the keto community, people doing keto. Like we're all on the same page. We have a lot more in common than we don't have in common.
Yeah.
Where there's a type of personality, like they're taking their health seriously, putting time and energy. They're not going to McDonald's, they're not eating junk. Like we're all on the same page, right? So we're just, presenting options and understanding and scientific understanding so people can explore their options. And so both Cyrus and I and the thousands of people we've worked with and so many millions of people living with type 1, we are all incredible test subjects as people living with type 1 diabetes for what lifestyle choices can you do to make yourself more insulin sensitive or more insulin resistant. And the reason we're great test subjects is because we know how much insulin we're using. We know how many grams of carbohydrate we're consuming because we're calculating that to figure out how much insulin to inject.
Yeah.
And we're testing our blood glucose all the time. Some people could be still doing finger pricks. Some people wear CGMs. But we have these 3 data points, which are essential to understand how well is insulin functioning. Whereas in your case, no matter what you eat, you don't really know how much insulin your pancreas is producing. You don't know that on a moment-by-moment basis. You could go get a fasting insulin test. You could figure it out in one way or another, but not on a daily basis like we can.
Yeah.
So I actually followed a plant-based ketogenic diet before I adopted the low-fat plant-based whole food diet, which we talk about in our book. So I experienced on that diet, my overall glucose to insulin ratio, was basically 1-to-1. And when you use these fancy nutrition softwares like Chronometer, you can remove fiber and you can remove fructose. All right. So we're talking just glucose. You can really talk about true insulin sensitivity. Mm-hmm. And when I changed from that ketogenic diet to a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, the amount of the glucose I consume and the insulin I need to metabolize that glucose, there was a 900% change in insulin sensitivity. So as people living with type 1 diabetes, Cyrus and I, we get to experience this on a day-by-day basis. Every day, every time we want to eat food, we inject insulin, we eat a lot of carbohydrate, and we're like, wow, like we are insulin sensitive. Isn't this fun? Let's go help some other people. I mean, and just so you know, like our personal story here a little bit, like we both eat over 700 grams of total carbohydrate per day. We inject a physiologically normal amount of insulin, okay? So roughly 30 units for simple math. And then there's peer-reviewed paper. Again, we talked about this in the book. Chapter 7 is the most important chapter, comparing a ketogenic diet to a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. There's published research on type 1s following a ketogenic diet and looking at how many grams of carbohydrate they consume and how many units of insulin that they require. And there, in this study, on average, people living with type 1 diabetes ate 30 grams of total carbohydrate per day and injected 30 units of insulin. Whereas we're eating over 700 and injecting most commonly under 30 units per day. So the magnitude is extremely different. So your original question is, like, what do you say to the people that are essentially doing well? Like, it's working for them. And what we say is, number one, kudos to you. Like, congratulations. I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad you're happy. I'm glad you're feeling well. Like, that's awesome. Like, amazing. What we're here to say is, you know what? There's something you might want to consider. You might want to look at. You might want to think at a bigger perspective and open up your mind to what's possible. But if you're choosing to live that lifestyle, you are choosing to live in a state of glucose intolerance. So people following a true ketogenic diet, if they eat a banana, their blood glucose spikes. If they eat a mango, their blood glucose spikes. Many of them joke they can't even eat blueberries, right? So in that state, you're choosing to be glucose intolerant. And we believe that is a concern. If you look at decades of research, that it's important to be glucose tolerant. Like that's something that's important. So again, we understand the keto community says, well, look, we're fat adapted. Then if we decide to add some carbohydrates, we can be flexible and then we could prepare for that glucose tolerance test. We can do better. We can become insulin sensitive. And that's true. What they're doing is they're starting to follow the mastering diabetes method to improve their insulin sensitivity before they go do a glucose tolerance test. So that's great. So like we're kind of all on the same page. I guess at the end of the day, you just decide which one do you want to do for your life. And it's our position that if you look at the evidence-based research, if you want to be conservative and follow an approach that's going to set you up for your best health in the long term, the data we have is on a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. You're taking a risk on the ketogenic diet because you just don't have the data yet about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm in total alignment with you guys. Like, just to be clear, like you're not competing with anybody. There's no competition. Like this diet's better or I'm keto. That's the problem, I think, too, is like I'm keto, I'm carnivore. It's like, well, you just limited yourself to being like having the possibility of learning anything new or doing anything different. And I think that's a problem. And you guys know this too. Those diets, typically from what I've seen, and the research shows it too, I think it's like 60% of people will not stay with a keto diet for long term. They just can't. It's just too restrictive, really, and so they don't do it anyways. I love that, and I'm all about results, and you guys have the results. So it's like, hey, like do whatever you want, but we do have results, so results don't lie. Okay. I love this topic, and I want to kind of merge. It's similar to the keto question, but like I've been dying to ask you this because you got people in your book that you're talking about 300, 500 grams of carbs. Are you kidding me? A low carb diet. How are people able to be? You're doing 700. How are people able to be doing those amounts of carbs? I'm so used to talking to health professionals that we're trying to keep it under 50 grams of carbs to manage weight loss. And so, how are you able to do this? And guess what? They're losing weight. And their insulin and glucose levels are phenomenal. Their A1C levels phenomenal. So how is that possible?
That's literally the exact same question that I asked myself when I first transitioned to eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet back in 2003. Because within 1 week, my insulin use. Okay, let me just kind of give you the numbers here. Prior to eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, I was eating a low carbohydrate diet where I was eating approximately 125 grams of carbohydrate per day. So that's not like a ketogenic diet, but it is like, under the umbrella of like carbohydrate restricted. So 125 grams of carbohydrate for 42 units of insulin. So if you calculate the metric, which is your carbohydrate to insulin ratio over a 24-hour period, that then gives you 125 in the numerator and a 42 in the denominator, which is approximately 3. Okay. So I'm eating approximately, no, it's not even 3. It's like a 2.5 to 1. Okay. So that means that every time 2.5 grams of carbohydrate enter my mouth, I have to inject 1 unit of insulin. Okay. So let's just call it a 3-to-1 just for the sake of argument. Okay. 3 grams of carbohydrate equals 1 unit of insulin. Now, when I switched over to eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, I did it relatively quickly because I was under the guidance of a professional. We didn't have that much time. And he is basically like, hey, I'm just going to switch you cold turkey and we're going to see what will happen. So I went from eating 125 grams of carbohydrate to 600 grams of carbohydrate within 24 hours. And I got to tell you, I was scared. I was
Yeah.
terrified
Yeah.
that was going to cause my insulin use to go from 42 units per day to like 70 or 80 or 100, right? And I was fully expecting it, but I was like, let's see what happens. My insulin use went from 42 to, in the first 24 hours, it went from 42 to 35. It went in the opposite direction. So I was eating 600 grams of carbohydrate, call it like 5x the amount of carbohydrate for, maybe like a 20% reduced insulin use. And then the next day I repeated that. I ate another 600 grams of carbohydrate and my insulin use fell from 35 down to like 30. And then the third day I kept on doing it. The fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth. By the time I was 7 days into this, I was eating 700 grams of carbohydrate per day. And my insulin use had fallen to 24 units per day.
Wow.
So if you calculate the carbohydrate to insulin ratio now, you do 700 in the numerator divided by 24, call it 25 in the denominator. That's a 28-to-1 ratio. So I went from a 3-to-1 ratio, or a 3-to-1 sensitivity, if you will, to a 28-to-1 sensitivity. So then when I further delved into the research to be like, wait a minute, hold on. Am I some genetic freak here? Is what's happening to me?
Or here's another thing, Cyrus. Like when you're telling me this, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, but you're probably working out for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, right? Oh, you're a bodybuilder. Of course you need insulin. You're a bodybuilder. You want to grow. But I don't see that from you guys, right? So
yeah,
you're clearly not bodybuilders. You're in good shape, but you're not bodybuilders. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. We're not sitting here pumping iron all day long. I mean, people tell me this all the time. They're like, you must be exercising 2 or 3 hours a day. And I'm like, no, I exercise for an hour a day. I've been doing that for a long time. And like, that's my, I haven't increased my exercise in order to help drive my blood glucose down. Right. So point being, with about an hour's worth of exercise, I can get those numbers, 700 in the numerator, 25 in the denominator, right? So when I delve into the research to try and figure out like what the heck is actually happening under the surface, what you'll find is that by performing this transition and eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, what you end up doing is on a molecular level, you go back into the liver and back into the muscle tissue to try and figure out, well, how is the fuel utilization of these two tissues going to change? And what's going to happen to that lipid droplet that accumulated that caused a decrease in insulin signaling? And what's going to happen to my glycogen content? How is the fuel choice by those cells going to change? And what you find out is that when you make this transition, you start eating more carbohydrate for less fat. Then what ends up happening is that lipid droplet that used to be pretty large, that used to antagonize the insulin receptors, starts to become a lot smaller. Okay, so it goes down significantly in size. And as a result of that, it antagonizes the insulin receptor way less. In fact, it doesn't antagonize at all. And the insulin receptor becomes awake again. And as a result of that, insulin signaling then becomes much more possible. That happens in your muscle. That happens in your liver. Simultaneously, there's more glucose available in your blood. There's more glucose available in your blood. Glucose transport is increased into the muscle and liver because there's more insulin action. And as a result of that, now you can store more glycogen. So there's less fatty acids. There's more glycogen storage. And so you've effectively switched fuels. You go from being fatty acid adapted or fatty acid reliant into carbohydrate adapted, aka carbohydrate reliant. And now as a result of that, the kicker is that you can do that for a very small amount of insulin. That's the kicker. That's what most people don't realize. Most people like to make up the story. They say, oh, okay, if you are eating carbohydrate anything, then you're gonna need more and more insulin over time. And that is not a true statement, because if you're eating carbohydrate from the whole plant world, like fruits and starchy vegetables and legumes and whole grains, those foods, and you can look in the research if anybody's curious, those foods elicit a reduced insulin exposure. They decrease your insulin secretory requirements. But if you're eating the refined carbohydrates like breads and cereals and pastas and cookies and crackers and donuts and sugar sweetened beverages, those will increase your insulin requirements. So what I always tell people is I say, listen, If you're on a low carb diet, that's awesome. Like totally cool. But please make the distinction. If you're eating a low carbohydrate diet, limit or eliminate your refined carbohydrate. I'm going to say that. You're going to say that. Literally every single health expert on the planet is going to say, get rid of refined carbohydrate. Nobody's going to say no to that.
Right.
But we say increase your whole carbohydrate intake, and that's where the controversy exists.
Now, Joel, one thing I want to add here is just to make sure we're not talking only about type 1 diabetes. So one of my favorite stories to share is, as you were, talking about earlier, like there's a lot of testimonials in the book, most people not living with type 1. And Tammy is actually one of the testimonials in the book. She's one of our favorite stories. And so one of the reasons we like her story is she came to us with fasting insulin data before she started our program. All right. So she comes to us with an A1C of 7.1%, which puts her in the type 2 diabetes range. She's using 2,000 milligrams of metformin. So that's a medicated A1C. All right. Her fasting insulin before starting our program was 17.4. Okay. Fasting blood glucose is 123. She has fatty liver disease. Wow. She comes kicking and screaming. She struggled in the beginning, but then she finally got in. All right. She did it. She followed the program. And in 7 months, her A1C dropped to 5.3%. That's non-diabetic. She's not using any more metformin. So that's an unmedicated A1C. She's lost 38 pounds. She reversed fatty liver disease. Her fasting blood glucose is now 93, under 100, right where she wants it. And her fasting insulin is now 5.2, right where you want it to be. And she's eating unlimited amounts of whole carbohydrates, just like Cyrus was describing. So this is a typical case for people living with type 2 diabetes, with prediabetes. And again, that is just the same display of what's happening for Cyrus and myself with the insulin we're injecting. It's the exact same thing that happened to her. She became more insulin sensitive. The insulin she was already secreting was being able to be utilized more efficiently. So she didn't have to produce as much. And now her pancreas is calmed down. It's happy. It's not overworked.
I'm telling you, you guys got me fired up. I got to go tell my wife right now that I can eat fruit again, because I've been banning fruit. And you guys, I mean, legitimately, and a lot of experts, I'm in the community of people. I'm thinking of, she has a couple good books actually out there. Dr. Catherine Shanahan. She was a Shannon. Yeah. She's got the, God, what's her book? Deep Nutrition. I mean, she's her and a lot of other ones saying, hey, fruit is, high in sugar. Rob Wolf, another one, great expert shaking his head. But I mean, a smart guy, right? These are some smart people. And, and it's just really invigorating. I'm just loving this. Your book just blew my mind. I'm telling you, 300 to 500 grams. You guys are having 700. I'm going to go have some carbs tonight. I'm excited, guys.
Well, you know what? We could actually do this. We could do an experiment for 30 days here. And we can I
have a CGM, by the way, that I haven't used. I got 2 more weeks on it. So if you'd like, let me know. I'll be happy. Let's do this.
Okay. Yeah. So we could construct it in a number of different ways, but
okay.
How many pieces of fruit do you eat per day right now?
Does coffee count as a fruit?
Donuts, are those fruits?
Yeah, none. I don't eat fruits ever. Every night, my kids, I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so they'll bring me, Dad, like they eat fruit on a regular, apples and mangoes, and I'll be like, they'll give it to them. I'm like, I don't want it, and I'm like, okay, I'll have like one but like very rarely do I have fruit. Actually, I take that back. Okay. I'm sorry, Cyrus. Every morning I wake up and I have a smoothie, it's my 20 ounces of water. I have like a nutritional shake, and I do put a little bit of blueberries in there, probably half a cup, frozen blueberries. Okay. I know it's not your guys' best. You don't like that and I get it because it's blended up. You don't get the actual whole blueberries because they're liquefied. But that is like probably the only fruit I have. So that's what I'm doing right now.
We're probably talking like, I don't know, 10 grams of carbohydrate or so from a half a cup of frozen blueberries on average. Okay. So here's what I think we should do. We can have some fun with this.
Let's do it.
Over the course of 30 days, we're going to get you from eating a half a cup of blueberries to eating between 10 and 15 pieces of fruit per day. Right. And people who might be listening might be like, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous, right? Just for frame of reference here, Robby and I eat between 15 and 20 pieces of fruit per day. And I've been doing that for 19 years. And he's been doing that now for 16 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely doable. But the fact that you have the CGM is actually really cool, because what we can do is watch your blood glucose on a day-by-day basis. And what we're expecting, that here's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
The hypothesis is that you start to increase your fruit intake and your blood glucose is going to go pretty high, right?
Yes.
And it's going to go high and it's going to stay high. And then all of a sudden you're going to be hyperglycemic. But what I think is going to happen is if we ramp your fruit intake up from like a half a cup of blueberries to like 2 fruits for a couple of days, then 3 fruits, then 5 fruits, then 7 fruits, and so on and so forth, over the course of like a week to 2 weeks, your blood glucose is going to be rock solid and you're going to be significantly increasing your fruit intake. And if you enjoy eating fruit, then you're going to probably be a much happy camper.
Yeah. Awesome. I love this. Okay. This is awesome. This is good stuff. I know you guys, Robby, I know we're getting to top hour. I know you got to run. I got a couple more questions that I do want to ask because you guys have some amazing content. One question I did want to ask you guys, and maybe Robby, you can hang out just for this question because I think it applies to you. What do you say for athletes? You know, I've been listening recently and Peter Attia has been talking about this and, you know, the idea that athletes, you know, and not even just athletes, but the idea that we need more protein and up to maybe even 2 grams. Everyone's been told 0.8 kilograms per pound of body weight. And now some experts are saying, you know, I think we're actually really deficient. We need a higher amount. Where do you guys stand on that? And then can you reach that level on the low fat, high plant, whole plant diet that you guys are proposing? What are your thoughts just for athletes in general?
I'm going to let Cyrus take this one. This is one of his favorite topics. So go ahead, Cyrus.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So this is another controversial topic because you could ask 10 different experts, like how much protein do you need? And you're going to get probably close to 10 different answers. And some people will give you their answers in grams of protein per pound of body weight. And some people will give it to you in grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And it's like off by approximately a factor of 2. Okay. So here's a simple way I think about it. I like to do it in terms of grams per kilogram because it's just easier for me to wrap my head around. Okay. So let's take your body weight right now in pounds. What is it?
About 150 pounds.
Okay. So we take 150 and we're going to convert that to kilograms. So we take 150 divided by 2.2. And that gives us basically 68 kilograms. We'll just round it up to 70 just for fun. Okay.
Yep.
So you're approximately 70 kilograms. And the question is, okay, based off of that idea, are you at your ideal body weight? That's the second question I'll ask you.
I mean, I will fluctuate between 150, 155. I don't really go past that. So I think I'm pretty ideal. I'm 5'7", 150. I think if secretly I would like to put on more muscle, but that's just my own, you know, ego. But other than that, I mean, if you're asking me like ideal, I'm pretty dialed in. Okay,
you're pretty dialed in. Okay, so let's just do the calculation again. Let's just pretend for the sake of argument that your ideal body weight was 5 pounds higher and it was 155. Mm-hmm. So you take 155 divided by 2.2. Now we end up with exactly 70.5 kilograms. Okay, so that's on the head, 70 kilograms. So the question becomes, based off of that ideal body weight, what is the approximate amount of protein in grams that you should be eating per day that's going to, number one, allow you to perform normal basal metabolic functions that proteins are required for. Okay. And most people, when they think of the word protein, the only thing they think of is muscle. That's it. Protein equals muscle. Okay.
Yep.
In the same way that insulin has thousands of metabolic functions and functions in glucose metabolism and fatty acid metabolism and amino acid metabolism and cell synthesis and DNA synthesis and blah, 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 blah. Protein also has a whole wide selection of uses in the human body. Okay. So protein breaks down to amino acids, and amino acids are used for practically everything that you could possibly think of. Okay. The infrastructure of cells is made up of a plasma membrane, which is fatty acids, but then you have thousands of proteins that are inside of the actual membrane. Those are cell surface receptors. And then inside of the cell, in addition to that, you also have proteins that play integral roles in mitochondrial synthesis. They're inside of the nucleus, they're transcription factors, and so on and so forth. Then in circulation, you have peptide hormones and you have protein hormones. Proteins are freaking everywhere. Okay. So when you consume proteins are being used for everything. Amino acids are used for freaking everything. They're TCA cycle intermediates. They're used for energy production. They're also present in their signaling molecules inside of your brain. I mean, the list goes on. They're inside of your nails. Your skin is made up of it. Every single tissue, collagen, you name it. They're freaking everywhere, right? So the point is that when you consume protein has a basal metabolic function just to operate your skeleton and operate your base level physiology. And then in addition to that, If you are an active individual, you have an increased requirement for protein because when you go and exercise, then you're effectively causing micro tears to your muscle tissue. And those micro tears have to get repaired. And the amino acids are the thing that can help repair them, right? Okay. So the next question I would ask you is, how active are you? And your choices are, I'm not active at all, I'm kind of active, I'm pretty active, or I'm extremely active.
I would say I'm pretty active. I try to do probably 5 days a week now. I'm averaging like I have this bike and I do like a 10-minute hit session on that. And then I will do some type of resistance training that, I might do like some like CrossFit kind of WOD. So it might be like a Metcon that I just pick for the day that I want to do because I like killing myself. It just makes me feel good.
Me too.
Or I just do like a 20-minute WOD, or it'll end up being some type of strength, 20 minutes of some kind of just strength work. I make sure I'm active every day. It's not the typical bodybuilding, like isolation, but I am doing some type of resistance training. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So
I'd say moderate. I'm liking the moderate. Yeah. And I would say if you're talking about resistance training, I'd say I'm averaging 5 days a week. And that would include one or two, a couple of days of some kind of Metcon or something.
Okay. So then in that case, I'm going to put you in the like upper echelons. You're like pretty darn active.
Okay.
And I'm going to put myself in that same category as well. Right. So that means on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe you're like at an 8 or something like that in terms
That's
of
fair.
Like
yeah.
requirement for, protein to help with protein synthesis. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we established that you are 70 kilograms. We established that you're a pretty darn active individual. And so for you, what I would do is I would target, if you are not an active individual, I would target you to eat approximately 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilogram body weight. Okay. So if you're sedentary, you're not really that active, I would say, okay, 0.8 times 70. So we do 70 times 0.8 and we get 56 grams of protein. That's like your very base level requirement.
That's nothing. Yeah. That's easy.
That's
easy to get. Yep.
Yeah. You can do that without thinking about it. Okay. If you are moderately active, I would go from 0.8. I would go closer to like 1.2. So now you're in the moderately active range. That means that your protein requirement is now 70 times 1.2 with about 85, 84 grams of protein per day. Okay. If you are highly active, like you are, I would put you closer to like 1.6. So now we're looking at about 112 grams of protein per day. Okay. And if you're like an endurance athlete and you are doing like long distance, significant metabolic bouts, then I might increase that to something like 1.8. But even then I haven't been convinced that that's necessary. Mm-hmm. So let's just put you at 1.6 times 70. That puts you at about 110 grams of protein per day. So the question is, how do you get 110 grams of protein per day from eating a plant-based diet? Okay.
Vegan protein shakes. I don't know.
You could certainly do that.
Yeah.
We just did this exercise actually earlier today where we went into our own individual chronometers and took a look at it. Just from my perspective for the food that I eat, if I eat 4 cups of chickpeas per day, which is like very easy for me to do because I just freaking love those things. 4 cups of chickpeas, 3 red potatoes, the approximately 7 bananas, plus 2 mangoes, a papaya, and maybe like a bowl of quinoa, like spread out throughout the course of a day. Okay? Yeah. Which is actually not that much food. Yeah. That right there is the equivalent of 95 grams of protein. Wow. Without even thinking about it. Okay. Okay. So we're looking at about 110 grams of protein is what we're looking for you. Right. So if you were to eat that with a couple other things, boom, you're already at 100 grams of protein. You got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Right? Okay. Love that.
Joel, how many grams of protein
crush this, man? You're gonna be a legend. You're gonna love this approach.
I can't wait, man. I'm excited. Yeah. I might even buy another CGM just so I can go to like a whole month and just keep it rolling because I think because sometimes the 2 weeks you're probably gonna need like a week of just some baseline kind of seeing where you're at. So I might even go higher just to let this experiment run because it'll be fun.
I love your reaction to the 7 bananas. I mean, I'm
just thinking like in one setting, like how when are you eating the 7 bananas? I'm like, oh my god.
No, it's spread out. Yeah.
Oh Jesus.
People love hearing that. I mean, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll have like 2 bananas before I go work out at CrossFit, and then I might have like 2 or 3 like right after the workout. So that right there is call it like 4 or 5 bananas right there. And then when I get home and I have like a smoothie bowl as an example, Or if I'm eating like a fruit bowl that's got like some papaya and maybe some mangoes, I might throw another banana in there. Before you know it, I'm up to 6 or 7 already. It's just that simple, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Joel, I want to say this has been fantastic. You and Cyrus continue. I can't wait to catch up with you later. I do have to run.
Yeah, man. I want to connect with you guys more, and I'm gonna wrap things up with him, but we'll definitely stay in touch.
I'll catch you later, man.
Awesome stuff. Thanks. All right, Cyrus. I know we've been going like for almost the hour, and I'm sure you got to run too.
That's all good.
We'll wrap some things up. I mean, this was amazing. A couple of things I wanted to just ask, and then I want to we'll go into some lightning round questions, and we can talk about where people can find you guys and your good work. But one is you have the book coming out. Any other exciting projects that you want to share that you guys are up to that you're working on?
Yeah. Okay. So just for clarity here, our book actually came out back in 2020, right before the pandemic. And so it's been out basically for like 2.5 years at this point. However, right now the paperback version of the book is being released. And that's actually what our book publishers told us, is that when you go from hardback to paperback, that's actually a gift that they're giving you because the book is actually doing a good job. And
it's
I was
actually doing well. Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. So point being is that the paperback comes out on October 18th of this year of 2022. And so we, of course, would love more people to get their hands on that book and, read it just like you. And
it's a fantastic book. Yeah, it really is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So any other projects we're working on? Yeah. So right now we have a coaching program, and the coaching program has been going pretty strong for the better part of like 4 or 5 years now. And we run, private coaching one-on-one where we pair you up with an accountability coach. We also have group coaching where we put you into groups of about 8 people or so. And then you have a, small group interaction with one accountability coach. And the transformations that we see from people they're freaking bonkers. I am saying, Robby read you Tammy's testimonial. We have people who are, they've been living with diabetes or some type of like blood glucose instability for like 50 years, literally 50 years. And they come to us and they end up losing 60 pounds, getting off a hypertension medication, dropping their cholesterol from being, like their LDL cholesterol is 160 to begin with, and then it drops to like 92. We've had some individuals who were diagnosed with autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis that's technically incurable, gone, disappeared.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. It's just like the stories are like, they're incredible. They get better and better and better. So
yeah,
if anybody's interested in participating, or they have a friend or a family member who really would like some help and are looking for what we do, is we teach people how to transition to a plant-based diet so that you can improve your blood glucose control in the short term. But I care more about your long-term health than I care about your short-term health. And that's one of the sort of like qualms, if you will. That's one of the qualms that I have with the ketogenic diet, like you were saying earlier, right? Yeah. It's hard to stay on the ketogenic diet. And even if you do, the short-term results don't always match the long-term results. So what we do is we create a sustainable set of habits that will help you improve your metabolic health today, but then also literally transform you over the course of the next like 2 to 3 to 4 years, so that you are a completely different version of yourself and you're living your best life.
Man, I love that. I always tell people, I work with a lot of weight loss clients, and I'm like, I'm not teaching you like how to lose weight. Like, I don't tell you to count macros and stuff. I'm teaching you health. And when you know health, you can't be overweight. The byproduct is you're healthy. The body can't be overweight. So
exactly right.
I love that, man. I'm in alignment with that.
You nailed it.
And then, before we jump into some lightning round questions, actually, I do have one last question for you, and it just goes about around diet. I'm just curious, do you eat at all any meat or any fish or anything, or is it pretty much just vegetarian? Is it vegetarian?
Yeah. So I grew up eating lots of meat, lots of dairy, lots of fish, and then eggs and processed meats. And I haven't touched that since 2003. So in today's world, no, I don't eat any of those foods anymore. And I thought I was going to like crave them and have a desire for them, but like, I don't really care anymore.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to highlight that you mentioned in the book, which I thought was great, and I thought that was true. You guys both of you guys, Robby and you, don't eat fish at all. And yet
Correct.
Your omega-3s are very high. I think it was like, and I think I do a functional medicine test through a doctor, and I think it's like 9% is on the high, is like the like optimal. I could be wrong if I remember correctly. And you were like 7 and he was like a 5.5, like really, really high for some guys who aren't consuming fish or supplementing with fish oil, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we don't supplement with fish oil. What we teach people how to do is basically to get your omega-3s from plant-based sources. And there's a lot of controversy about whether or not that's effective, but the truth is that when you consume 1 tablespoon of freshly ground chia seeds or 1 tablespoon of freshly ground flax seeds, that right there meets your requirement for omega-3 fatty acids. So Robby and I basically have been eating a whole food plant-based diet, and I'll be honest, sometimes remember to put flax seeds in my food. Sometimes I just flat out forget. So it's kind of inconsistent with that. And despite that, my omega-3 status was a 7.1 and his omega-3 status was like an 8.2, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also in addition to that, our omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is also another, very important metric for inflammation, was down. Mine was like a 3.5 to 1. And I think his was also in the like 3 or 4 to 1 ratio.
Yeah, which is perfect, really. And people would say you can never get that because nuts, for example, are high in omega-6s. And, how could you possibly get that ratio? You're eating, based on what you're eating, and you're proof that it's possible. So
yeah, absolutely. It's very possible. It's funny because like you can sit there and geek out and you can try and do all of the like advanced calculus on foods to try and predict what would happen if I had this much walnuts and I had this many pinto beans and I had this much flaxseed. This is what my omega-3 status should be, right? And you can try and predict what it's going to be, but then when you actually do it, you get a different result, right? Because biologicals, organisms are like phenomenal machines. And it's not always that easy to predict what's going to happen. So I was predicting that because I was inconsistent in my flaxseed intake and inconsistent in my chia seed intake, that my omega-3 status would be low and I would be less than 4%. And there's also all this information, especially in the like vegan world, that vegans are at an increased risk for dementia. And I see that all over the place. And I'm like, oh, if that's true, I should know that. And I should protect myself against developing dementia in the future, right?
Yeah.
So I got the omega-3 test and it said 7.1. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't really have anything to worry about right now.
Yeah. Awesome stuff, brother. We'll jump into some lightning round questions. Before I do anything, I know I asked you a lot. Anything I didn't ask you, though, that you wish I had?
No, actually, I had a question for you.
Go for it.
Go back to protein. I told you that, my calculation for you would be to eat approximately 110 grams of protein per day. How many grams of protein are you eating per day right now, if you know the answer?
Good question. I haven't tracked it. Let me just think. And I'll tell you, because my diet's moved all over the place. And, there was a time when I was like learning about longevity and protein's bad for you, IGF-1 going up and it causes cancer. We were kind of talking about that, right? Briefly about the insulin and stuff. And so I was really fasting a lot and avoiding protein, to extremes. I would have protein, probably at night. And then some days I'd even do it all like once a week. I would do some kind of like protein fast, like under 15 grams. So, okay, now where am I at? I'll give you like a typical day. I do like maybe a smoothie. Like I said, that's 15 grams of a vegan protein in there. It's a pea and a rice. So that's 15 grams there. Yeah. I'll do 2 eggs and a salad for lunch. So like we talked about, maybe an egg got 7 to 9 grams.
That sounds about right.
So 14 plus 15, we're at, 30-ish or something? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then at night, I might have a snack. I might have another shake, and that's another 20. Let's just throw another 20 grams in there. And then at night, I will have usually some kind of protein, veggies, and a starch, like some white rice or something like that. So it's not that much protein there, but the protein would be in the meat that I'm eating, whatever I'm consuming. And it's, it varies. We rotate the animal product meat. Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's probably at night, I'm probably getting a good 30, 35 grams.
Okay. So it sounds like your total is probably somewhere around 100 grams per day right now.
Yeah.
On a more meat-based diet. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So that's actually good to know that you wouldn't necessarily, if you were going to switch over to eating a more plant-focused diet, you don't have to increase or decrease the amount of protein that you're consuming. You could still stay at about that same target. You're just going to be getting it from different sources, and it's really not that big of a deal.
I just got to eat more bananas. So
there it is. That's all it is. Who knew?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, let's get some lightning round questions.
Cool.
I'm curious, man. What are some choices, or maybe a choice that you think that you made that made you who you are today?
Ooh, good question. Choice that I made that made me who I am today. I'm gonna honestly say when I met my now wife, Kylie Buckner. It was back in San Francisco, 2012. I wouldn't say it was love at first sight, but there was definitely a little voice in the back of my mind that was like, pay attention. And I was like, okay, I hear it. And I listened to that voice, and we developed a really strong friendship and then a really good relationship. And she's been with me now for 10 years, and she puts up with me every single day. And I love that woman to death. And, you know, my life would be drastically different if she wasn't around.
I love that. I can totally relate to that. You know, you and Robby are such a force in the wellness world. I'm curious, like, who inspires you, or is there anybody that you follow? I know I asked a lot of PhDs and they tell me, Joel, I don't follow anybody. I'm just so steeped in research and papers. I don't follow anybody, but I'm curious.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I don't really participate in social media because it just like, it hurts my brain.
I agree.
But someone like David Goggins, who's just got this like will of like iron, like you can't break that guy.
Yeah.
Right. He's someone that I admire significantly, not because of the way he eats, like doesn't really matter. I admire him because of his just like determination to make shit happen.
Yeah.
Right. And like, he says he's willing to put up with anything, any kind of like physical abuse. It doesn't matter. He'll take it all. Right. And just that type of iron will, I'm just like, man, that is a metaphor for life. Yeah. And if you can just put that into many different aspects of your life, then like, man, you're unbeatable. So
yeah,
I would put him up there big time.
Beautiful. I'm a big reader, as you can see. Any books, any books that had a huge impact on your life? I don't know, like there's a top 1 to 3 that just come to your mind.
Yeah.
Again, it could be research papers because I'm sure you do a lot of that too. But
no, actually, one of my favorite books of all time is The Count of Monte Cristo. Have you read that book?
You know what? I tried reading it a long time ago, and I don't know what version I got, but it was the way it was written. I was just like, and now I've gravitated to such a nonfiction world. It's really hard for me to read fiction.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I get bored with that. I'm like, I want to learn. I'm trying to learn more about health. I want to know more about chylomicrons, and so it's hard for me to get into that. But yeah.
Okay, so if you're into nonfiction, I would say The Count of Monte Cristo, mind-blowing story. If you want nonfiction, there's a book. One of the best books I ever read is called Eat to Live by Joel Fuhrman. Okay. Joel Fuhrman's actually a good buddy of mine, and his book blew my freaking mind. It was like released back in like 2009 or something like that. Perennial bestseller, by far one of the best books I've ever read. Pick it up, read it.
Awesome.
Have you read that book by any chance?
And your book? No, I haven't.
No, okay.
That's why I love asking this question. So it's perfect. I'll have to pick that up. I'll have to pick it up. Last 2 questions. We'll wrap it up. Any rituals or hacks or practices that you do on a regular basis? You know, some people are big gratitude journaling in the morning. Is there anything that you do on a regular basis?
Is there anything that I do on a regular basis? Yes. Every single day, I move my body. I prioritize it. Just like you, I go to CrossFit on a daily basis. And it's gotten to the point now where if I don't get my workout, then like,
you're angry.
I'm not that fun to be around.
Yeah.
Right? And I know it.
Yeah.
Right. So I prioritize movement, and it's just become a religion for me. So that is a hack, if you will, that keeps my mind at ease. And it also just makes my body feel real good. I can't give it up.
100%, brother. And
how
last
about
but
you?
not least, you know, for me, movement. I totally believe in it. I'm like, you don't have to do. I tell my clients, I'm like, you don't have to do CrossFit, but you need to have a movement practice, and it needs to be 20 minutes a day. I think at least. It could be walking. It could be jumping on a ball and mobilizing. It needs to be something. You need to be doing something. So I'm a big believer in that. I do the gratitude stuff. For me, though, the mindset's big, right? Because you know this too, being an entrepreneur and just doing all the things that you guys are doing and the big goals that you have. You can get kicked in the teeth a lot. And so you'd have to have that David Goggins mindset. I have to come back to that over and over and continue to bombard my subconscious with good stuff, because if I don't, I will go back into old limiting beliefs, and I don't want that. So for me, mindset is huge.
100%. I love it.
Last but not least, man, where can people find you and Robby and all the work that you guys are doing?
Awesome. Thank you for asking that question. So the easiest place is just to go to masteringdiabetes.org. That's the simplest place to go. That's our website. We have everything you could ever want there. We got a bunch of recipes. We got blog articles. We got our podcast there. We got YouTube channel. You know, you can find it from there. If you are into books, then go to Amazon and pick up the Mastering Diabetes book. Again, released in 2020. The paperback is coming out now in 2022. It's changed, you know, more than 100,000 people's lives. And the stories just like, they never get old. Right. So if you like books, then go there. If you like YouTube, go to just type in Mastering Diabetes. If you like audiobooks, go to Audible, type in Mastering Diabetes. And if you like Instagram, then type in Mastering Diabetes and we'll find us there.
Boom. Cyrus Khambatta and Robby Barbaro, who's not here. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you guys so much.
Thanks a ton, Joel. This is super fun. I appreciate it.